On a clear, crisp morning in 1999, Flight 702, a commercial airliner, was soaring high above the clouds, cutting through the sky at 35,000 feet. The passengers were unaware of the whispers. On the ground, in the cockpit, the crew, seasoned veterans, prepared for a routine descent. But it was anything but routine. Minutes after the final communication with the control tower, Flight 700 vanished from radar. At first, authorities chalked it up to a mechanical failure, a tragic but explainable accident. But as the investigation unfolded, cracks started to form in the story. They were telling. Why had there been no distress signals? Why did no one see it coming? Why did the wreckage appear so far off course? And why did the survivors' testimony seem to contradict everything the official investigation said? What if the crash wasn't an accident at all? What if it was something far more deliberate, something hidden in plain sight and covered up for years? The truth is darker than you can imagine. Flight 700 had been scheduled as a routine domestic flight, departing from a bustling airport on the East Coast. The plane, a well-maintained Boeing 737, was equipped with the latest systems, and the crew was experienced. Captain Harris, a 15-year veteran with over 10,000 hours in the air, and First Officer Lee, a sharp, by-the-book officer known for his meticulous approach. The day was clear, the skies calm, and passengers were settling in for the 6-hour flight. At the time of departure, everything seemed perfectly normal. Passengers buckled their seatbelts. Flight attendants went through their safety routines, and the aircraft climbed into the sky. The passengers, mostly business travelers and families heading to visit loved ones, had no idea that their fates were sealed from the moment the engines roared to life. The first clue came when the aircraft failed to make the usual routine radio check-in at the expected waypoint. It wasn't a missed call, it was as if the plane had simply disappeared. Air traffic control tried reaching the crew, but there was no response. The usual automated systems, which would have pinged back with the plane's location, were silent. A strange moment of silence that no one on the ground could explain. Then, there was the distress signal, but it was not from the plane itself. The initial reports indicated that a nearby airliner had intercepted a cryptic message, a garbled transmission that seemed to be coming from Flight 702. Though the words were incomprehensible, no one knew what it meant. Air traffic control assumed it was a mistake, perhaps interference from other frequencies. But in the aftermath, that voice would be remembered as one of the most haunting parts of the mystery. The crash site was found hours later, scattered across a forested area miles away from the flight's original course. It seemed impossible. How could the plane veer so far off its flight path? The wreckage was scattered in a way that suggested a violent, chaotic descent. But strangely, there was no sign of any fire, no usual markings of a catastrophic fuel explosion. The fuselage, though severely damaged, remained almost intact in several key parts. No one could understand how it had managed to land in such an isolated location, so far from the nearest established route. As investigators began combing through the wreckage, the questions piled up. What had caused the aircraft to stray off course? Why had the pilots failed to make a distress call? Why was there no indication of any emergency? All the evidence suggested something was terribly wrong, but no one could figure out what. The black box, that crucial piece of evidence, was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until weeks later that a vital lead surfaced. Hidden within the air traffic control logs were reports of odd behavior, something many had initially dismissed as simple human error. The cockpit communications from Flight 700 were examined, and everything seemed standard until just before the final transmission. Captain Harris, who had been known for his calm under pressure, had suddenly sounded agitated. His words, when they were finally decoded, made no sense at first. "I have to. I can't. We need to." That was all that was heard before the transmission cut out. What did it mean? What had Harris meant to say? The tone in his voice, though brief, was not one of a man preparing for an ordinary descent. It was a man who, in those final moments, had been under incredible pressure no one understood. More disturbing still were the accounts of the survivors. A handful of passengers who managed to survive the crash. They spoke of strange sounds, loud, mechanical noises that rattled the entire cabin just moments before the plane started to plummet. There was also mention of a sudden, unexplained jolt that felt nothing like turbulence. The plane was reportedly shaking violently, and many passengers believed they were going to die long before the actual crash. One passenger, a woman named Sarah Walters, described how the flight attendants were unusually calm for a flight that was clearly in distress. She recalled one of the attendants walking down the aisle with a serene expression, As though nothing was wrong at all, she asked the attendant what was happening, but the attendant merely smiled and said, "Don't worry, everything is going to be fine." Sarah's statement raised questions about what had happened in the cabin. Was it possible the crew had been in on something? But if the crew were aware of the impending danger, why didn't they try to warn anyone? Further investigation into the wreckage revealed something even stranger. Among the debris were pieces of a strange, unmarked device. It looked nothing like any part of the plane's usual equipment. It was small, inconspicuous, and almost intentionally hidden within the debris. Why hadn't it been reported earlier, and who was responsible for it? The discovery of the device only deepened the mystery. Was it a malfunction, a deliberate act? And if so, who was behind it? As months passed, the investigation into Flight 702's crash began to stagnate. The official story of mechanical failure was losing credibility, and the survivors' accounts seemed more and more at odds with what the authorities were willing to admit. The inconclusive evidence, combined with the strange device found in the wreckage, suggested something far more deliberate. A former aviation expert, Michael Thompson, took a personal interest in the case. He was disturbed by the unanswered questions, and he wasn't alone. A growing number of independent investigators began to question the official narrative. What had really happened to Flight 702? Had it truly been an accident, or had someone on board sabotaged the flight? The theories began to surface and believed it was a case of terrorism, but nothing pointed to any extremist group being involved. Others speculated that the airline itself may have been involved in some sort of financial cover-up. But the most chilling theory of all was that one of the pilots, perhaps Captain Harris himself, had been coerced into taking the plane off course. A theory that seemed increasingly likely as more details emerged. The device discovered in the wreckage was traced back to a private contractor, with links to the airline, a company responsible for providing maintenance services to multiple airlines. Was it possible that someone had planted it in the plane's systems, intentionally causing the malfunction? If so, who stood to gain from such an act? Was it a carefully planned conspiracy designed to cover up something far more nefarious? In the end, the truth was never fully uncovered. Despite a massive public outcry and relentless pressure from families of the victims, the investigation was officially closed, leaving behind more questions than answers. The device was never fully explained, and no one was ever held accountable. The survivors of Flight 702 were left to live with the haunting knowledge that they might have been part of something much darker than they could ever comprehend. The wreckage of Flight 702 was eventually dismantled, and the flight was forgotten by most. But for those who lived through it, the mystery would never truly be solved. They would carry the weight of the unknown with them for the rest of their lives. Was the crash really an accident? Or was it something far more sinister, buried beneath layers of secrecy? The answers, if they even exist, are locked away, hidden in the silence of a plane that crashed without warning, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions. As time passed, the world moved on, but for the families of those who perished, and for the survivors who witnessed the truth behind the crash, the mystery remains unresolved. The conspiracy was never unraveled.